But it does raise the question, and the question was designed to really bring a spotlight to what has become an increasingly cult-like interest in our government and indeed around the world in transgenderism. And some would say in, sexual peccadillos. Everything is about diversity and the rainbow and trans people, and it comes on the heels of those appalling events in Albert Park where a mob of people physically intimidated a group of women, most of them New Zealanders, made it impossible for them to exercise their right to free speech while the New Zealand police force stood by. And I'm not doing very well at getting interviews with any government politicians, so I thought I'd invite David Seymour on for his thoughts on what has happened in this space, as they say, over the last couple of weeks. David, welcome to the platform. Good to have you back with us. I've got to start with this question. What is a woman?
It's an adult human female, Sean.
Bang. Okay, that's right. Glad that was easy, wasn't it? Why do you think the Prime Minister found it hard?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think Chris Hipkins is drowning generally. You might have seen him get interviewed a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't know something. He said, look, I get given a big pile of papers to read every weekend. I can't know everything. So I think the guy's finding the job pretty tough, not only because it is a tough job, but because he's got all the landmines buried by his own government, many of which were buried by him. So I think Chris Hipkins generally is really struggling to stay afloat.
All right. And he said to me, look, I haven't had time to formulate an answer to that question. I've got to say, I've suggested that formulating an answer is figuring out how to lie.
Well, I think you can have honest thoughts about, what you make of the world and how you explain it to yourself and others. It's possible that he wasn't trying to lie, but it certainly shows he hasn't done the thinking.
All right, let's go back to what really kicked this all off, those events in Albert Park. I noticed that arrest warrants have now actually been issued to some of the perpetrators of the violence against those women. But certainly, interviews I've done, calls I've taken, suggested that the violence there might have been avoided had the police operationally done more. Is that your view?
Yeah, there's a real big question to be asked there and answered. There was a big police presence down on Queen Street where Brian Tamaki's mob were, but there wasn't a big police presence where this mob were. And as you have uncovered in your different interviews, there were a liaison between Posey Parker's group and also the police, and they didn't show up for the kind of pre-meeting that morning. I've had a number of people who are constituents, people in the Epsom electorate and beyond, who have said they were there. They've never felt less safe. They were astonished the police did nothing even when asked. I've heard that many frontline police around New Zealand are quietly, pretty disturbed by the lack of response. Chris Bailey is ex-police spokesperson, and he's fired a bunch of questions because this is what you have to do and it's what you have to do as an opposition MP, try and dig in and try and get to the bottom of it. But what is clear is that in this instance, the police failed in their duty, and it was either a major misjudgment or a prejudice that prevented them from taking these threats as seriously as they should have taken others.
It also, I guess, goes back into the what is a woman issue. Do we have a government and administration that is captured by wokeness, do you think?
I think it's not just the government. You look around our whole society, you look at a lot of the media, you look at the courts, you look at the academics, you look at the public service, the government departments. They're all obsessed with this postmodern idea that there is no universal humanity. There is no one world that we can all link arms and problem solve on. There's just a whole lot of identities, and what matters most is your identity. This is postmodernism. I did a philosophy degree. I knew about this stuff. I didn't think it would be taken seriously. Over the last 20 years, it's been taken very seriously. And as a result, we've got a bigger problem than wokeness. We've got people who don't actually agree that there is a real world, that there is a common standard of universal humanity. Everything is about an identity, and the ends justify the means. And you look at this, person, Shanil Lal, absolutely nuts, but getting a huge platform and being made Young New Zealander of the Year. It's wider than this government. I guess the battle to really make sure that objective values of universal humanity and a real world we can problem solve on, that's for all of us right across society, and actors starting in Parliament, hoping to be in government, so we can actually instill some values that make sense to New Zealanders and allow us to be a competitive country again.
All right. What impact do you think the Prime Minister's response to my question on Monday has had in terms of New Zealand's international reputation and the way people view this country? And I would like to think, as a sort of patriotic New Zealander, that people hitherto have thought well of the little battlers from down under.
Look, I tell you one thing I heard recently that worries me in the long term, at least. I was at a meeting, a bunch of people got their friends around, and I gave a talk, and I do this quite a lot of people's houses and so on. And they said, look, 15 years ago, New Zealand was cool. New Zealand was a place the world admired. And today, it's kind of like, what are you guys up to down there? Like, have you opened the borders again yet? Like, are we allowed to do anything? Are you welcoming people? What's happening? And when you have a video of the Prime Minister of the country who, he might have an answer you disagree with. He might have an answer you agree with, but actually who can't answer a simple question like that and just pauses and stumbles for 60 seconds. It's just painful. And for firms that are trying to get workers to come here, immigrants, for people that are saying, look, why don't you invest, send your money to New Zealand? Why don't you come here on a holiday? Why don't you come here for an education, export education, our fourth largest industry? None of that can be helped by Chris Hipkins' performance the other day. Maybe we should blame you for asking the question.
Oh, yeah, it's all on me, apparently. I'm the devil incarnate. The other thing was that story, and for obvious reasons, we watched it. I watched it as best I could on Twitter from my step on the naughty, where I sit on the naughty step now. Our mainstream media didn't actually cover that question and that response till yesterday afternoon. They were almost willfully ignoring it in the hope that it would go away. Do you think that is a problem, that we also have a mainstream media which is part of the problem?
Yeah, it is, but I just go back to it's a deeper philosophical problem. It's about identity politics and postmodernism. People say there's some conspiracy, the government's telling them what to cover or whatever. I don't think it's that. I think there's a lot of groupthink. I think being on Twitter all the time doesn't help them. I think that, they've lost a huge amount of funding. They're not sure about their jobs, which tends to make people less secure and more susceptible to groupthink. And then you've got this intellectual current that's come through the universities and the courses that they take, where, what matters is not what you do or how you problem solve or how you make the world a better place. What matters is which group are you from and what happened to your group in the past, and should your voice be promoted or whatever. So the media has bought into the idea that, trans people are one of these groups that, need to be protected, and therefore you can't debate these issues. And that's why, we find that something like this only gets any kind of mainstream media coverage if it gets so big on social media they feel that they're losing clicks and can't ignore it.
Yeah, yep, I get you. Hey, look, the other thing I want to talk about today, valedictory of former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today, the announcement that I think had already been road-tested through leaks that she's going to take up some position, reporting to the Prime Minister as special envoy for the Christchurch call. As far as we know, she's not going to get any public money, but I'm sure there is some trust or international internet tycoon is going to flick a few dollars her way. She's not going to be on the bones of her bum. But I guess this is a time when you sit back and, gosh, I was thinking back, David, you and I and Jacinda Ardern and Materia Ture did a debate at Parliament, maybe back 2017 that was, before she was Prime Minister or even leader of the Labour Party, as I remember. And kind of politically, she's done, is she, or not?
Well, first of all, I've got a bit of flack over the years for saying I don't hate her. I don't think she's evil. I think she's basically a very good person who has been totally overwhelmed by events, that the world turned out to be far harder and more complicated than she realised. And that's why she just failed, time after time after time. I mean, you look at COVID, the testing, the tracing, the vaccinating, the rules they made, divisive, ineffective. You look at housing, you look at child poverty, you look at climate emissions. I mean, even the things that were important to them have been failures. And then you look at, are we getting kids to school? Are we raising productivity? Are we ensuring New Zealand stays a first world country? Those kinds of things aren't even on the radar. So, while I don't have any personal malice against her, she is done for the simple fact that she's left such a legacy of policy failure that affects everyday people in New Zealand. And fixing all of that, trying to reunite New Zealand behind good ideas, even just something like the treaty, trying to say, well, actually, we think this is a document that brought people together and gave everyone the same rights instead of dividing us into tangata whenua and tangata tiriti. Man, you get tired just talking about it. She has left a huge mess because she was so good at promising, she was good at emoting, she was good at communicating at first, but problem solving, And I put that back to that same issue. You can't solve problems when you think someone's identity matters more than their common humanity.
Interesting. Let's loop it round then. Was the leadership style of Jacinda Ardern part of the creation of this cult of identity that has caused so many problems?
No, I think that she is more a product of it. This has been coming for years. She's amplified it. Her government has taken these ideas and run with them. But even if you look at her ascension, and I think there's an irony that she always gets judged for, being a young woman who had a baby. People talk about all that. I don't talk about that. I just talk about, what sort of results did she deliver in the job, which is how you should treat people in a modern and respectful country. So, she, to some extent, has been a product of this identity politics, which I think is wrong. And she's also, I think, been very prepared to amplify the idea that, the treaty is about two different identities. I mean, you name the identity politics. She's been in there, for example, ramping up the quotas in the public service and so on.
Yeah. I looked at her and throughout her prime ministership, David, and actually thought if you analysed what she said, she wasn't the most militant. She wasn't the most extreme in the room. Often it was others projecting onto her or co-opting her into the madness. She was actually pretty careful and cautious in her public statements as Prime Minister. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at where she's at, like in a global scale, I mean, New Zealand is still a free trading country. We still have a relatively simple tax system compared with other places. We still have, pretty good controls over government spending. It still means they can choose to spend on stupid things, but it's transparent. We do still have a relatively orthodox policy settings. But having said that, if you look at the legacy, what's there now, fair pay agreements, 3 waters, employment insurance. I mean, these are policies that are either extremely expensive or very damaging. And those things, we need to stop because this country, there's no law that says it stays first world. We can become much poorer and start wondering where it all went wrong. And it went wrong once we started putting someone's identity ahead of their common humanity. And we started saying who you are is more important than what you do. Those are the things that are just death to a country that wants to actually become wealthy and successful.
All right. How did you get on with her personally?
Always fine. And like I say, I've had a bit of flack for, saying I don't think she's evil. I don't think she's up to some grand conspiracy. I just think that she's someone who had good intentions, thought it was all a lot simpler than it was. And when you look at something as simple as housing, she thought if the government just built more houses, then everyone would be happy. Well, that was a failure to understand the problem, that it was about infrastructure, it was about land use planning, it was about too much bureaucracy to get a consent. And so, always got on well with her personally, but always been prepared to just point out that she's not doing the business and people are worse off as a result.
What do you think about her being appointed, a job being created for her, let's be honest, special envoy from the Prime Minister's office to the Christchurch call. What's all that about?
I think it's just a continuation of marketing over substance. It's not obvious what the Christchurch call has done. Apparently, it's about governments telling social media platforms to take down extreme content. Well, they did that on the day of the tragedy in Christchurch. They did it very quickly. They've continued to develop their technology to detect and take down dangerous material. And actually, social media platforms work with police every day, for example, to identify videos where people may be trying to commit suicide. And tell the police and get around there. So social media platforms are constantly developing their technology to take on dangerous activity or people that may be going to commit a crime or are committing a crime. They're already doing all of that, and they're doing it in a range of areas, not just extremism. It's not clear what exactly the Christchurch call or Jacinda Ardern have done to help develop their technology. But again, you can show up and take the credit. So I guess just as she was as Prime Minister, she will carry on the same way in retirement. And
while she says she's not getting paid, I've got no doubt an infrastructure will be built around her. And I look at the similarities to the Helen Clark Foundation, which actually receives quite a lot of taxpayer money because it's adjuncted to universities who pay its staff and pay for all their office equipment. It seems to me almost this is a way to set up a little cult of personality around Jacinda Ardern.
It may well be. And look, basically there's a couple of issues. One is that governments change, and I think it's going to be pretty difficult to convince any different government in the future that this is a worthwhile thing to fund. I mean, look, maybe it will be. Maybe they can make a case that having Jacinda Ardern as special envoy to the Christchurch call is, really making a difference for the New Zealand taxpayer. And maybe a future government will keep funding it, but it's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it?
Are you going to go along this afternoon to the valedictory?
No, I won't be at her speech, and that's not intentional. I've been pre-booked. I'm actually at 7 o'clock tonight speaking at the Northland Rugby Club rooms in Whangarei. So if you're up there, love to see you, but I'm pre-scheduled to be speaking in Whangarei, have been for weeks. So I won't be able to make a valedictory speech, but I hope to meet people in Whangarei tonight, and we'll be doing our best to talk about how everyday people who want this country to change can join together and actually change it.
Yeah,
that's what's important now, not the past.
Do you expect... Look, we haven't had a round of polls, and quite a lot has gone on in the country, and I do think that, Posey Parker, that Albert Park thing was, in some ways, a watershed moment in New Zealand's awareness of where identity politics is at and how deeply it is embedded in parts of our body politic. Are you going to make a prediction for the next polls? Are you starting to get to your maximum of 12 to 15%? And are we still going to have, by the polls, the Maori Party deciding who the next government is?
A couple of things. On the overall situation, I think what's going to be affecting people is that there's a lot of job losses mounting up. And, of course, when it's half a dozen journalists, all their journalist friends report it for about 3 days wall to wall, and that was your good friends and colleagues at Today FM. But actually, there's a lot of job losses not going reported. Some companies are laying off dozens, if not hundreds of people. And I think that is going to be, people say, okay, everything's expensive, but everyone's got a job, except for 300,000 people on benefits. But most people have a job. Once things are expensive and you can't get a job, then I think that's going to lead to some real concern about the economic management by this government. So I think that is going to hurt them. As far as ACT goes, I mean, pick your poll. I mean, the last one I saw had ACT at 13. Some of them are down 10 or 11, others as high as 14. We're somewhere in that zone. Let's make it 12 or 13. Now, we know from our research that there's at least another 5% out there who are thinking, I want to vote ACT, but I'm worried it takes away a vote from National. And I say to those people, every vote on the right is changing the government. If you give it to ACT, it's going into the same pot. It's just with us, it's a stronger brew. So I think that there's at least another 5%. I think you can see Axe as a third of a new government with some real leverage over the Nats to make sure that the change is real for a change. That's what we're campaigning for. So no, we're far from peaked.
And are you of the view that the honeymoon is over for Chris Hipkins?
Oh, I think it was over in a minute, and I'm sure you know which minute I mean.
Thank you very much, David Seymour. Look, that's a very interesting interview. I thank you for your time.